Hi, Assalamualaikum and good day. My name is Nurul Najiha binti Muhammad, and today me and my partner Atira
Hi, my name is Nur Atira binti Muhammad.
will be discussing on the chapter 10, which is style, context and register. So what are the factors that influence the style that you use on your addressee? So the speaker relationship with the addressee will determine the speaking style. A relationship status is determined by the relative social distance or solidarities such as addressee's gender, age, setting, and social background. For example, speaker will use a standard speech styles with a stranger or someone that they are not close to. However, the speaker will use a casual or relaxed speech style when they speak to someone that they are close to, for example, their friends or their family. The example just now, which one is for children and which one is for adults? Yes, exactly. Number 2 is for children and number 1 is for adults. So number 2 is suitable for children because it's short and grammatically simple. Even though it looks longer than the sentence number 1, but it consists the simple sentence and it also uses some of the conjunctions like but, and at the same time, it is simpler used and more common words also being used in the sentence. So it's very suitable for the children. Meanwhile, in sentence number 1, it is for adults because it uses more complex sentence and at the same time it uses the low frequency words such as exotic and then gratitude. This is another proof that's to show that different addressee will influence the use of the language even though the message of the both letters are the same. So from the example just now, we can say that the age, social background is one of the factors on how it influences the language you use. So what is accommodation theory and how do speakers accommodate? Accommodation theory is where people adapt and change their pronunciation or speech style according to their addressee. And in other words, it happens when people adjust their way of speaking to suit people whom they are talking to or who might differ in terms of their age gap or social roles. So the purpose is mainly to ensure that the smooth, understandable conversation to happen between them and to make the addressees comfortable. For instance, an adult might use simpler choices of words and vocabs when he or she speaks to their children. So next, what are the differences between speech convergence and speech divergence? So let's take a look on speech convergence first. Speech convergence is also known as speech accommodation, where it is an act of adjusting the speech patterns to match the other groups with expressing unity or shared identity, considering it as a polite speech strategy. For example, a mother simplifies her sentence constructions with simpler grammar and vocabulary to make it easier for a child to understand and communicate with her. For example, you want? Meanwhile, speech divergence means the act of distinguishing oneself speech in order to draw an obvious difference between one group to the other group to show the group's distinctiveness and not sharing with the speakers. Stylization is the knowing deployment of truly familiar style or identities that are marked as deviating from them, predictably associated with the current speaking context. For example, we have dialect stylization. So dialect stylization involves in forming non-current first-person personas by phonological and also related means. So formal context and social roles. The roles is determined by his or her position or status in the society, and he or she is expected to follow an expected set of behavior. So the speech style will be influenced by the social role. Style will also change in different formalities of the context. In a formal context, the speakers will choose the style after assessing their status of social roles to the addressee. For example, in an educational setting, a teacher will use a formal speech style to communicate with their students. Both parties will use the formal speech style to express the politeness and also respect to each other. For instance, the students may ask for the permission to leave the class by saying, "Excuse me, teacher, may I leave the class please?" instead of saying, "Can I leave?" Next is colloquial style and vernacular. Vernacular is a non-standardized form of language and it does not have the official status. It is usually the first language learned by people in multilingual communities. It is also often used for a narrow range of informal functions like the most relaxed style. For an instance, in a formal situation, when we would like to have someone who dislike away from us, we would simply say "bugger off" using the colloquial style. However, in a formal situation, we use more colloquial and vernacular terms. And usually the terms that we speak to our family or our friends, the one that we are close to.
Alright, so the next one is interaction of social class and style. Alright, so each person's speech style will be influenced by the social class, meaning that when they come from different social classes, the speech style will be different as well. And this is highly related to the social hierarchies that we usually know, which is the lower class, the middle class, and the upper class. So these three classes will have different speech style. So there are two important elements here, which is inter-speaker variation and intra-speaker variation. Inter-speaker variations happen between different speakers. Okay, when different speakers come from different social class, definitely it will lead to variation between the speakers. And the next one is intra-speaker variation. Intra-speaker variation happens within a speaker. For example, this one particular speaker is in different situation. So this speaker will have variation in his or her speech style that will differ based on the situation that they are in. Alright, so we are moving to the next one, which is hypercorrection. So what is hypercorrection? Hypercorrection involves extending a form beyond the standard. Okay, hypercorrection usually happens among the low social class speakers. Why? Because somehow they want to be just like those in the higher social class. They want to sound or they want to speak just like them. So that's why they do hypercorrection. So let's say their speech standard is at this level, the lower level, and then they are trying to imitate the speech act that is belong to the upper social class speakers. And somehow when they try to imitate this standard, they tend to go beyond it. And this is where we call as hypercorrection. So one of the reason why those who come from the lower social class tend to do hypercorrection is because they are insecure about their own speech. That's why they want to sound or speak like those who comes from the upper class. And somehow they try to practice the prestige norm that is belong to the higher or upper class speaker. So based on the book that we have read, there are many examples of different style based on the Western societies. So what about the non-Western societies? How their speech act or speech style differ from those in the Western. Okay, so we are going to look at the non-Western societies, which are the Japanese, the Koreans, and also the Japanese. Okay, the first one is Japan and Korea. So their speech style is actually influenced by the social status of the speakers and also the relationship between the speaker and also the addressee. Okay, for the first one, the social status of the speakers. So basically, when the speakers are trying to communicate, they will actually use the language according to which social class that they come from. So when they come from the lower social class, so most of the time the language that they produce is different from those who come from the middle or upper class. Okay, so the next one is the relationship between speaker and addressee. So the relationship between these two parties will influence on how the speech style that they will utter. Okay, so again, it will be based on the social background as well, because when the speaker want to talk to the addressee that come from those in high social class, then they will use appropriate language in the communication. And I think we can relate to our culture as well, because when we are trying to communicate with other people, of course we will look at their social background, and that will actually influence their choice of language or the words that we use in communicating with that people. And this is very important to show respect and also to be polite in communication. Okay, so the next example will be based on the Javanese society. So in Javanese, they have two ranked social dialects. Within each of these, they will have three stylistic levels, which is completely different from each other. Each level involves different pronunciation, grammatical forms, and vocabularies. So people in each level will have different set of rules, different set of vocabularies and terms that are being used. The next subtopic to be discussed is register. What is register? Register describes the language used by groups of people with common interests or professions, and it is also the language used in different situations associated with such groups, meaning that different group of people with the same job or the same profession will have different register, which is the different language that they will use in this particular group. For example, there are many different registers that we can look into. For example, the language of sport commentators, politicians, educators, doctors, and many more. So each group of this, they will have different register, different language, and different speech style. Alright, so now we are going to look at one of the example of registers, which is the sport announcer talk. So when the announcer is describing or hosting a sport event, they will use different language than the language used in the other context. They will have a specific terms and vocabularies that are specific for sports. So sport announcer will be doing syntactic reduction and syntactic inversion. Okay, what are those two? Okay, the first one is syntactic reduction. Syntactic reduction happens when they omit the noun, the pronoun, or the verb be in their comments. So for example, we can see in the first example, it bounced to second base. The word in bracket is being omitted by the announcer. Okay, originally the sentence would be it bounced to second base, but the announcer will just utter bounced to second base. They will omit the word in bracket, which is it. Okay, it is the pronoun. Most of the time, the listeners will be able to predict. They can understand what is meant by the announcer, even though they omit the pronoun or the noun there. The next one is syntactic inversion. It is a reversal of normal word order, and it actually provides time for the listeners to identify the subject of the action. These are the examples of syntactic inversion. Okay, let's see the third one, which is on deck, is Big Dave Winfield. So the normal word order would be Dave Winfield is on the deck. But instead, the announcer uttered it in reverse, okay, not in the normal word order. But again, since they are focusing on that specific register, so they will be able to understand the commands uttered by the announcers. Okay, so these two types of talk, syntactic reduction and syntactic inversion, is categorized as play-by-play description, where they focus on the action. When the announcer are doing these two types of talk, they will be focusing on the action of the players in that particular sport event. Now we are going to look at another type of sport announcer talk, which is heavy noun modification. Heavy noun modification involves heavy and long modification of the nouns, and it actually focuses on the people. So when announcers are commenting on the people or the players in any particular sport event, they will use heavy noun modification. How it is being used? Okay, we can see this in one of the example. Okay, here we have David Winfield, the $25 million man who is hitting 056 in this word series. So the announcer is actually focusing on that particular player, that particular person. Okay, so the rest of the description after the noun is just a modification, just a description of the noun. Okay, so the main focus here is on the person or the player that is being described by the sport announcer. Alright, so heavy noun modification is categorized as color commentary, where people are the focus of the interest. Alright, the last one is routines and formulas. Sport announcers will have their specific routines and formulas when they are commenting on sports events. Alright, so in sport commentaries, the sports announcer will be doing two things at the same time. They are watching the sport, and at the same time, they have to comment on it. So they have to think and utter commands quickly and fast. So that's why they have specific routines and formulas. Okay, so the use of routines, specific routines and formula, they can somehow reduce their burden. Instead of uttering every single word or complete sentence to describe any particular sport, they just have to use the routines and formulas. And eventually, the audiences or the listeners can understand the routines and formulas because they are actually in the same register, right? So they have the same point of view. Okay, so let's take a look at the example on how routines and formulas happen. So we can see one of the examples of how the sport announcers use specific formulas in commenting a horse race. So in a horse race, during the starting point, the sport announcers will just say, and they are away, or and they are off, to show that the race has started. Instead of saying the race has started, they will just say, and they are away. And that is actually enough to say about the starting of the event. They do not utter a complete sentence to comment on any particular event because they have specific formula that can be used in that specific event. As a conclusion, different people have different speech act or speech style. The way people talk in a court, in a classroom, or in business meetings will obviously be different. And different speech style or speech act will be influenced by the social class of the speakers, the ethnicity, the culture, and maybe gender. So generally, all of us has different speech style depending on the situation, the context, and the register that we are in. And all these variations can be seen in the Western societies as well as the non-Western societies all over the world. And we can see the similarities and differences between the styles in the Western societies and also the non-Western societies. So I think that's all from us. Thank you so much.